Hey everybody, welcome back to your Dawn of Autonomy podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, your host and the CEO of P3 Tech Consulting. We're kicking off a brand new month and it is a mouthful. This month is dedicated to OEM system and software leaders, sponsored by Sagetech Avionics. And here we have with us Tom Furey. Welcome back to the show, Tom.
Good morning, Dawn. It's great to be back. And what a great title for the month. Honestly, I don't know which one we are. I think we're all three, so we'll just roll with it.
I remember when we talked. So everybody out there, Tom has been a regular on our platform since the very beginning of it several years ago, and has always sponsored the best of like that month in December. And this year he's like, let's do a different one, and we came up with this title. But you're right, it's a perfect title for what you do, Tom, because you guys are experts and leaders in all three areas: original equipment, manufacturers, systems, and software, all three. So before we get into Sagetech, for those that don't know you, tell them a little bit about yourself, Tom.
Okay. So me personally, I started my career in the Navy flying airplanes off aircraft carriers. You can't ask for anything better than that. After that, got into business and a variety of manufacturing, engineering, and then general management roles. About 9 years ago, found myself at Sagetech Corporation and just fell in love with what we were doing, making micro transponders and really starting in that area. In 2019, a few of us had the opportunity to acquire the avionics assets of Sagetech Corporation and start Sagetech Avionics. So we're now coming up on our 5-year anniversary in November. And I absolutely love what we're doing and what we're focused on. And there is a lot of focus in our company. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, throughout today. And again, delighted to be in this industry and delighted to be still back with Dawn of Autonomy, which used to be Dawn of Drones, right?
Well, I'm going to go off script right away. Callsign was not Maverick. What was it?
Sarge.
So
Sergeant Furey. Day I walked into my first squadron, they said, Furey, Sergeant Furey, and that just stuck, right?
I love it. That is
So
awesome.
then the enlisted people who actually work for a living were a bit offended that my call sign was an enlisted rank.
No doubt, because you know what? Who runs the DoD are those sergeants, to be sure. Fun fact, Tom, my call sign was Pitbull, not the singer and not the dog. You know what it means, right? So what I was told was that when a pilot has munitions locked on, and basically it's a laser guided munition and it's fire and forget weapon, they say Pitbull. And
I've launched LGBs in combat and found probably hundreds of them in training missions, and I don't recall ever saying Pitbull.
well,
But
maybe it's an
Navy and
thing.
Air Force have
It
different
might be an
languages.
thing,
Yep.
or maybe my commander was just totally bullshitting me. And when he decided to give me the call sign and made up this really cool story while we're drinking a bourbon. So could be that. Could be that. You never know. But anyway, all right. So you kind of alluded to what you all been working on, your mission. So let's get people up to speed for those that haven't watched the last couple shows or don't know a lot about Sagetech Avionics. Tell them what your focus is.
So as a company, we have a mission that's ensuring safe airspace through advancing technology, and really we are about airspace safety. And we're a small business, right? So we're a little over 30 people right now. We have to focus because we are very detailed technically, and we make very robust systems and solutions. So we can't do a ton of different things and do them haphazardly or half-assed, half-baked, right? So for airspace safety for us, what that means, and I'm sure we'll get into greater detail of that, is on the civil/commercial side, you're talking about beyond visual line of sight safety. How do we integrate UAS into the national airspace without destroying the very safe yet fragile ecosystem of our current national airspace? So we create certified or certifiable products that help us integrate all aircraft together safely in airspace. The flip side of that, an extension of that same technology, as you and I have talked multiple times, right, is IFF, identify friend or foe. That's about airspace safety. A little different though. That's about preventing Tower 22 from reoccurring, right? So I've got an aircraft coming in. I know whether this is something I should defend myself against or something that I should welcome back with open arms. So kind of IFF, ACAS and transponders, all those things are all about maintaining the airspace safety that we need.
Yeah, so for those that don't know, when we're talking about Tower 22 in Jordan, that's the drone that came in and wound up killing a number of our soldiers on the ground. First, by the way, time in over 40 years that our troops were basically killed from the air, because we've held air superiority all this time. So really disturbing. And Tom, you and I collaborated on an article, an op-ed, basically. I believe AUVSI published that about how this IFF technology can be small enough to put on smaller drones and would have prevented that kind of incident, right? Because so many people think about counter UAS and they think about traditional systems, but really counter UAS is a system of systems. And this IFF, I think, would be a critical component of that. But let's talk, Tom, is the right word that you're really mentioning in terms of whether it's IFF or on the commercial side, the transponders that you make, is it conspicuity that we're talking about in particular?
That's a word. Yeah, sure. I wouldn't say that's the right word necessarily,
Okay.
but that absolutely captures some of it, right?
Oh,
So kind of, transponders are generally all about being seen, and modern transponders with ADSB in and now new modes of Mode 5 IFF that are similar to that are to see, and ACAS senses and avoids or detects and avoids other aircraft, right? So it's see and be seen, right? So there's an aspect of conspicuity, but there's also an aspect of sensing what other hazards are out there in the airspace.
okay, so a holistic kind of approach here. So let's talk about the military side and stay with that for a minute, because that is your MX-12B, right? Your
Yep.
transponder, IFF transponder. The 12B was one of the first ones, very small, a little bit bigger than a deck of cards. Is that right? In terms of size. And this was one of the very first certified by the DoD for aircraft that are way smaller than the traditional large military aircraft you think about.
Yep. And that's been our history. And I'll just detract from what you said, not detract from it, but go off script a little bit.
Yeah.
So back in 2011, well, 2014 actually, the old Sagetech Corporation that I mentioned earlier, and this is technology that we acquired in starting this sort of new generation or iteration of it, created the very first micro transponder. It's this thing. It's literally the size of a business card. So the purpose of this notch, if you can see that, I'll put it on white background,
Yeah, I can see it.
is so that if you take someone's business card, it fits perfectly within that.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, and it weighs, about less than a quarter of a pound or something like that. And that came from Airspace Safety. So that came from a request from an OEM customer that was making UAVs that were being flown by DoD. And they said, hey, look, and don't quote me on whether these were the right aircraft, but I think it might have been somewhere, a decade and a half ago or whatever, where a Shadow aircraft crashed into a KC-130 in the landing pattern or on the ground or something like that. And they said, hey, you know what? UAVs are awesome for combat. They keep people out of harm's way. They're composite or fiberglass. They're invisible to radar. But oh, by the way, when they're coming home, they're invisible to our radar as well. How do we make them conspicuous, to use your word? So they asked us if we could develop a transponder, which at that point was the size of a small shoebox, right? And many of the legacy and many, yeah, and heavy, 10, 12 pounds, something like that. To put that on a 40-pound aircraft isn't going to work. So we developed initially a circuit card and then packaged that into the XP transponder series, first certified as an Ames Mark 10, so not IFF, but a mode A and C transponder. They're still flown today. They're still flown today with DoD in different programs. They're standard equipment on, for years they were standard equipment on almost everything that DoD flew that was a small drone. Now with the advent of micro IFF, it's not necessarily this that's standard equipment. So that was our background in it. So when we built the MX platform, the first thing we wanted to do was incorporate this new technology, which was an advance of encryption and security technology by DoD called Mode 5 that required some different waveforms and some more processing power. We also decided to make it diversity dual antenna. So it's a long way of getting to answer the question that you asked, right?
No,
And then
it's really great. And this is like the deck of cards.
yeah, this is the MX platform. And this is actually our mechanical prototype. So it's plastic with a weight in it to make it feel the same. It's 190 grams. It's the size of a deck of cards-ish, right? What's funny is that's the rangefinder. The next slide down is the MX-12B. It doesn't matter. They're the same hardware platform. So we build robust platforms that we can have multifunction products on. And we'll talk about that and what we're doing in the future on why that's important. But diversity means this thing can be flown in manned aircraft of any size. It's full power and it's small enough to go in many small drones. And where you're part of the conversation where we started and where we have been talking in the past is this IFF technology could assist in protecting us versus incoming enemy aircraft, as well as preventing fratricide, which is one of the key purposes of IFF. So to prevent us from shooting down our own aircraft or shooting and especially killing our own airmen or sailors who are flying these aircraft, right? We don't want to shoot down our own aircraft, so we use IFF to make sure we recognize that if it's friendly, we don't shoot at it, right? This can also protect us from unmanned aircraft, but this, as small and as awesome as it is, right, is still too big, too heavy, too expensive for very small drones. And also, it pairs with a crypto computer. That's not a Sagetech product. There are companies like Viasat and General Dynamics and Raytheon that make those. They work with the NSA on those. Those are very protected. Those would have the encryption codes that rotate, et cetera. Those you don't want to get into enemy hands.
Right.
So you certainly don't want to have
that into here, because if one of those goes down, they can find it.
Yeah. You don't want it going in with a disposable, right, or an attritable drone if you don't have to. So you want IFF, you don't want even the micro IFF size and weight, and you really don't want to put the crypto on that. There are ways to solve that. And we've been working with parts of the DoD talking through that solution. You can make a small IFF, you can have the crypto presented to it in a way that the crypto algorithm, the crypto computer isn't on board. These are all programs that could start engaging in relatively soon. And for me, the ultimate goal is to be able to automate counter UAS. Because right now you can't automate counter UAS because you don't know who's friendly and who's not, right?
Yeah.
The Israelis have published that they've shot down 40% of their own drones
in their
counter UAS solutions, right? No, that's I think it was somebody in the US at Quad A or something like that, who works with the Israelis, provided that statistic. But you can imagine that's the case. Think of what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, right? There are drones everywhere, right? Yeah. It's that Jetson land that we thought of, only in a combat way. So if you're going to shoot them all down, you got to know who's friendly and who's not.
Wait, didn't the Russians say they put IFF on their small drones?
The Russians have IFF that's about this size and a little bigger. So they're not going to be on the small first-person view drones.
Okay, gotcha.
Right, but they are putting them on their Reaper-like drones, right? Okay. So yeah, they're I wouldn't even say fast followers. They're slow followers in the technology of the United States. And it's not the same as ours. So we're pretty sure that's not our technology that they somehow got. But it is an important problem to solve, the counter UAS problem, to automate it, because I think, as everyone knows, we can't, one guy with a drone buster isn't going to be able to protect the airspace, right? You've got to have an integrated, automated solution that can detect and track and classify every drone that's in airspace to ensure you know who's coming home and you should let them in the gate, and who's not, and you should prosecute them otherwise, right? And then who's maybe questionable. Yeah. IFF can solve that. It's going to take some development, but there are ways to do it to make IFF small enough, cheap enough, and secure enough to not have that crypto on board, yet still provide the same consistent solution with NATO and allies.
Well,
Not to go too far off track, but one thing I've heard is, hey, you could do that with UTN, right? Remote ID or whatever. And there are certainly ways to do that. And you can do it with different encryption, AES 256 encryption or whatever, right? There's, IFF is not the only way to identify that something's friendly. But if we're going to be working with partners, which I'm sure we are, if anything happens in Taiwan or anything happens in Russia or any part of the world, right, that's generally a coalition forces, it's got to be compatible throughout that coalition. It took us a decade or more to roll out Mode 5 as IFF to NATO and allied forces. To try and roll out a new system for UAS identification would take as long, right? So why not leverage IFF, make something that's a tweak off of IFF that then is backwards compatible with systems installed today, so we can all enjoy interoperability with each other.
well, and Tom, we're not even talking about swarms, dark drones, right? Like
Yeah.
the technology that we're dealing with just continues to advance, and these systems are having a hard time keeping up. This again is kind of a piece of that puzzle, and so I'm excited that you're working on it. But Tom, you mentioned there are developments in addition to some of this R&D and thought leadership you're putting into the counter drone in terms of IFF. Tell us a little bit more about the MX12B transponder like updates and kind of what's happened since we last left off the story on our last show.
Yeah, a couple of things, and some that seem against what we've always done, right? So
Yep.
one thing, as you mentioned, update. So we're working on the fourth version of the MX12B, MX12B V4, really creatively named by us, right? And you can
Okay.
imagine we've got
It's
V1, V2, V3.
a lot of Roman numerals there, but
Yeah,
okay.
it's awesome stuff. But the V1 was the basic Mode 5 diversity micro IFF transponder, and as you pointed out, the very first one to be certified by DoD AIMS for Mode 5. And then V2 came in with Mode 5 Level 2B out. And V2, V3, and V4 capture and use this technology. This is super important technology. We didn't develop it, we implemented it and got it certified as the first transponder of any size to be certified with Mode 5 Level 2B out. What it is, and I think most of your viewers are going to know what ADSB is, right? And that's conspicuity in civil airspace, where instead of needing to be interrogated by something and only being visible to ground-based interrogators or secondary surveillance radars, now most aircraft in airspace since 2020 in U.S. airspace, in the world actually, have ADSB where a few times a second, like 6 times a second, they'll broadcast. And we've talked in the past, it's the Horton hears a who thing. I'm here, I'm here,
It's
right?
my level like Dr. Zeus. So
Yeah,
keep
mine too. That's my engineering team helps me dumb it down into something I can understand with colorful pictures, right? But ADSB is that continuous broadcast, periodic broadcast, but it doesn't require an interrogation, and therefore it can be passively received inside of another aircraft or here at my desk or you name it, right? And that passive reception is important because now Mode 5 Level 2B is essentially encrypted ADSB. So instead of needing to be interrogated by a Mode 5 interrogator, when you turn this on, right, you're broadcasting automatically encrypted, secure information about yourself that you're friendly and maybe some flight-based information. Now, this is great because now for that airspace situational awareness, for the picture your JTAC on the ground from the Air Force, right? Your Joint Terminal Air Controller. We used to call them FACs, forward air controllers, right?
Mm.
You don't want him with an interrogator broadcasting his position with an active emitter, but you'd love him or her to understand what's in the airspace and whether it's friendly or not, right? Well, along comes Mode 5 Level 2B. It's not going to tell you who's not friendly, but it's going to tell you who is friendly, and you can figure out the rest, right?
Yeah.
So this passive Mode 5 Level 2B is important. That was the V2 with the transmitter. V3 is the Mode 5 Level 2B receiver, all incorporated now, so they build on each other. So MX12B V3 has standard Mode 5 Level 1s and 2, plus all the civil modes and ADSB in and out. But then it adds the V2 capability of Level 2B out, and then the V3 capability of Level 2B in. And now V4 is a new platform also called the ACX 3000 series platform. So it's actually a tweak on the MX, but it's enough of a tweak that we're calling it a new hardware platform
Okay.
because it adds 978 UAT receivers, which is a US ADSB frequency. It adds much stronger processing power and a lot more memory. So now we can incorporate ACAS, we can incorporate aircraft protocol translators, other things into the box that would normally have to be a bunch of accessories around the box or other boxes. So that MX-12B V4 we're just now developing.
Okay, so this V4, because it's IFF, that's military, right? But you mentioned, this ACX 2000 has so many other functionalities. Are there also commercial customers that would use this then?
Absolutely. So as you point out, right? So if you remember this, the pictures that flashed up
Yeah,
was an MXR rangefinder and an MX-12B, and they looked the same with
they
a
did.
different label. And then there's also an MXS, which is the civil transponder with ADSB in and out. It looks exactly the same with yet a different label, right? So
Yeah.
we build these different, we build a robust, flexible platform that we can create different products off of. The ACX 3000 can be a civil transponder, and we've already started working with the FAA on the certification of that. So that can be used just like an advance of the MXS as a civil transponder. We're incorporating the MXR rangefinder, which is an interrogator function into it as a civil interrogator, and we can host ACAS on it. So all in this one box, that's literally just a couple of millimeters bigger than the MX. It's going to have, for a civil side, it's going to have civil transponder, it's going to have interrogator, it's going to have ACAS. It's an all-in-one DAA solution that is then compatible with a matrix-based radar or an Echo 9 radar or something like that for non-cooperative traffic sensing, right? So that's the civil version of it.
Yeah,
The same military version of that, we add mode 5 to it. We add mode 5 level 2B in and out to it. We can add ACAS. Now you could have, in a crowded combat environment, nobody's broadcasting ADSB, but you could be utilizing mode 5 level 2B, which is a secure version of that, to recognize other friendly aircraft and making sure you're avoiding collisions with those. You can also use it as a sensor to determine, hey, I've got 16 drones in the airspace, but I can tell that these 6 of them are friendly. So therefore, these other 10, I've got to investigate further to determine whether I need to shoot them down. So that'll be the ACX 3000M series, just military series.
Okay.
And that's really just kind of software firmware changes to incorporate the military encryption and security technologies. The hardware platform won't change.
Okay, so you've got a wide range of stakeholders on both the DoD side, including partner nations, as well as on the commercial side. Share with us some success stories. You mentioned beyond visual line of sight. You mentioned UTM. I'm curious if you're working with any companies on that front, or even to the extent you can share on the military side. How are folks successfully using your technologies for this safety function that you've been talking about?
Yeah, so it's a work in progress, as you know, because a few years ago, you and I probably both sat here thinking that we'd be in Jetson land right now and we'd be certifying aircraft and we'd be flying line of sight and receiving packages and warehouse deliveries via drone.
I have to say something. I just saw the latest Alien movie, and it's 2030, right? Like, think about that. It's like 5 years from now, and they're in space and they're doing all this stuff, and it's just like, so and I think some of the original movies were all like 2030 as well, like all the the ones with Sigourney Weaver and whatnot.
Yeah.
But you're right. Yeah, here we are thinking that we would be flying around in air taxis and drones would be ubiquitously delivering goods in every neighborhood across the land, and we're not quite there yet.
No, we're not. And part of that is because of the safety that we're kind of working on. We work with the FAA on our TCA committees like SC 147, SC 228 for DAA, et cetera, ASTM. Everybody's really working on this. So it's not that technology isn't advancing, but technology in a way is advancing faster than we can safely use it. And that's what we want to be careful of, because we we can't be the next gen iPhone. We've talked about this probably in the past.
Yeah.
You can't necessarily have a minimum viable product and then throw it into airspace with flight over people, with operations over moving vehicle, or in congested airspace that has other aircraft. Because if it fails, you can't just reboot it.
Yeah.
It's weight falling out of the sky on people or crashing into another aircraft, right? So we've got to be careful, and I think the FAA and the global civil aviation authorities are doing a very good job of trying to go as fast as they can. I'm sure they can go probably a little faster, and certainly the FAA can go a little faster.
Yeah.
But they're trying to make sure that they're taking risk into account and then putting rules in place to ensure adequate safety, risk-based, right? So if it's a paper airplane, you don't necessarily have to have robust safety solutions on it, right? But if it's a 50-pound aircraft or a 100-pound aircraft that could hurt somebody, you got to have safety solutions. So we're making, it's still a work in progress, but some of the progress we've seen, we've all seen just recently a lot of beyond line of sight waivers from the FAA.
Yes.
One, I think, super critical one that happened in May, I think, of this year. And we've been working with this partner for a couple of years, actually, but American Aerospace Technologies with their Air Ranger platform, which is a Group 3. So it's a 300-pound aircraft for doing long linear infrastructure inspection.
Yeah.
Under Chevron, they got a really, really large scale, not just waiver, but exemption, which basically says, okay, you don't need to comply with this specific rule because you have something that protects against that.
Yeah.
And this is it's got the MXS on board, which does ADSB in and out. It's got the ACAS computer, but we're not yet relying on the ACAS logic because we still have to get enough test cases to prove that to the FAA. But it's got ADSB in that we're presenting to an operator that can fly this thing well beyond visual line of sight without visual observers. And it's got 2 Echodyne radars on board for all-weather detection of non-cooperative traffic, because in that kind of airspace, you're going to have a lot of crop dusters and stuff, and people who don't fly with a transponder, probably legally don't fly with a transponder, but you still don't want to crash into them.
Yeah.
So that was a really exciting and we think broadly impactful exemption, because they'll continue to fly and collect data, but now you can start setting up these big ranges of airspace where something is trusted to fly beyond line of sight. So that was a really
big too. I mean, Tom, if memory serves, I remember writing about some of the initial trials in this in the Texas area, if I recall correctly. And it was like for VTOL magazine. I know it was AATI, and I'm almost 100% sure it was your transponders on board for those initial flights. I know you've been working with them for a while.
That was with NASA, probably under the NASA program, which
yep. You're exactly right. That was with NASA. And then it sounds like that's progressed now to, let's call it real world ops, right, with Chevron. So, wow. Yeah. So, like we talk about, oh, we're not the Jetsons yet, but, in some respects, we have come far, because I remember the early days of that with NASA, as you said.
Yeah.
This today, where there's an exemption, not just a waiver, and there's nuances there. That's really important. The FAA saying you don't even need to do this anymore because you're good. That's hugely significant. So
and it's not just for, hey, wow, the technology is advancing, we're allowed to fly beyond line of sight, but think about that now from a Chevron perspective. You can use this system rather than putting another piece of traffic up into the crowded airspace with a person on it, right? It eliminates cost and risk associated with manned aircraft. And again, I think I've heard where drones and automation really is best for, what is it? It's routine, it's boring, it's risky, and there's an R word for boring.
Dangerous and
dull. Yeah, that's it. The dull, but if you think about that,
we're using the B's, but it's the 3Ds. And there's somebody said a fourth one. I forget what the fourth one is, but it's also a good one. But yes, definitely dull, dirty, dangerous
Yeah, the
jobs.
dull dirt, and that's what that would be with a man or a woman, right? A human
Yeah.
in an aircraft, whether it's a fixed wing aircraft or a rotorcraft, it's going to be expensive, but it's also kind of risky. You're flying out over airspace that you're a long way from home. There's other aircraft in the airspace. You're trying to get close enough to a pipeline to inspect it. You're trying to use camera systems and maybe not fly the aircraft. It's easier for an automated system to do that, takes the risk out of it. It's also pretty boring, these long linear flights, right?
Yeah.
So that was a super exciting one. We also had one in Europe with a company called Primico. They're a Czech manufacturer. They make the Primico 150, it's called. And they got a broad clearance for it's like a type cert, but it's not quite a type cert, right? For safe flying of the Primico 150, and that uses our MXS ADSB in and out transponder
Now,
in
is
Europe
that
too.
in Czechoslovakia or more broadly across Europe? You got EASA, and you've got the national authorities, who kind of gave this permission or this approval?
I have to refresh my memory, but it's not specific to the Czech Republic. It is a European LUC, it's called, which is a on their risk SORA,
Okay,
certain
gotcha.
the risk management thing where they have their class of it. I'll have to review what that is. They did all the work just using our technology, but it's exciting to see our technology as a key part of that.
Well, yeah, globally, right? So we're not just
Yeah.
talking the United States, now we're talking across Europe, which is also very significant. So, man, lots going on. So, Tom, what else? Like you and I have talked so many times, and you keep honing, refining, adding, developing as we go. Kind of what's on the horizon here for the rest of this year,
Yeah.
2024. As we close this year out. I can't believe we're almost into quarter 4.
I know, me neither. But and I think we'll hopefully see some contract work here, but we've been working with DoD on this, on doing an about face as a company. I say that tongue in cheek, but we got to make something bigger and heavier, Don, because we're just making things too small.
Okay.
Not really.
You're going to
but
have to explain this one to me because
Yeah,
you just
you alluded
convinced
to that
me.
earlier.
You just convinced
This
me the
is
size of a credit card or a deck
Yeah.
of cards is really cool. So why is bigger better? What are we talking about here?
This isn't your typical Sagetech product, but these are prototypes of Sagetech products. But it's the innovative team that we have here, and we are almost all engineers, right? Other than like Ashley and myself, I think we're all engineers.
Yeah.
It's an MCX. We
No,
can
we have
that one,
here we
right?
go. Yeah.
So what we've been talking to DoD about is they have capabilities in their aircraft that are Mode 4 or Mode 5 IFF that are not able to advance. They're obsolete or becoming obsolete, but they're also big, unwieldy, and hard and expensive for the DoD to upgrade, right? To include things like Mode 5 Level 2B or UAT, which includes weather on your 978 frequency ADSB, to include ACAS down the road, et cetera. So what we did was say, hey, you know what? Kernels, we can do that. Let's go show you in your CH-47 Chinook simulator what our box can do. But
I smiled, Tom, because you said colonels, and I was thinking he's talking to the Army because a Navy guy, that's a captain, right? So, all right. So, and then you said,
and we're talking to everybody, right? I use that
Connected
as
the
an
dots.
example, right? We're talking within DoD,
Yeah.
but they said, but we can't change the aircraft, right? So that's a problem that you've got in legacy fleets, right? You've got thousands of aircraft across DoD that are built a certain way. And for me to say, go use this, which, oh, by the way, seems awesome, except what it means to them is now I've got to drop an Ethernet line to some place in the aircraft. I've got to get rid of the 1553 legacy data bus I'm using and use Ethernet and plug it into my control system differently, et cetera. So this may be better, faster, smaller, and cheaper than the box they have today, but the overall cost of ownership to it may be approaching, if not more, than their current products because of all the changes they'd have to make to adapt this to a legacy aircraft. So we said, not to worry, sir. We'll just put it in here, and we can put the crypto in with it. And then we'll use that big honking J1 connector you love so much, and we'll put it in that'll fit into a tray that you have today. But by the way, now this adapter makes the MX plug and play compatible with 25-year-old aircraft to
Wow.
replace and upgrade their capability. So now they can start utilizing Mode 5 Level 2 broadcast. They can start thinking about how they would implement ACAS, et cetera. And then gradually, if they have new variants of those aircraft or as they bring in new aircraft, the same solution that they're already storing, so we're not having to charge them an arm and a leg for a new product, right? Can be plugged into the digital backbone aircraft without the additional packaged air that we're given in this one.
Yeah.
But it's a very low cost way for them to bring modern capability into legacy aircraft and then be compatible with future digital aircraft. So
So
that's super
truly,
exciting to work on.
yeah, truly, as they say, MOSA, right? Modular Open Systems Architecture.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, very, very amazing. It's so funny that it's just like, and you said 25-year aircraft. I was thinking, well, I know the airmen are flying around in 50-year-old aircraft, but either way, you're going to have to retrofit something big. And so that was really smart what you guys are doing there. All right, cool. So that's coming up. What else? Like as we kind of think about next year, 2025, we're hopeful there'll be like a Part 108 notice of public rulemaking out for beyond visual line of sight, but as you said, some waivers rolling in, etc. How do you see Sagetech evolving and continuing to evolve with both the commercial and military markets?
Yeah, so we've covered the things that I suspect we'll make on the military side, and while it seems narrow focus, there's a lot of work to be done there, right?
Yeah.
Helping upgrade legacy fleets, positioning new modern digital aircraft with new modern capabilities, being able to employ collision avoidance and future technologies into systems that the aircraft will be able to have in a cost-effective way, and then taking IFF and modifying it in a way that could be used to help us automate our counter UAS solution. There's a lot of work to be done there. We're not going to finish that this year, next year, or the year after, right?
Yeah.
On the commercial side, it's continuing more of the same. It's taking that same platform that we've talked about. As I mentioned, we sit on, and in one case, one of our senior systems engineers chairs one of the working groups of a subcommittee for the RTCA, helping to write the standards for collision avoidance and DAA. And again, risk-based management, your 10-pound drone probably isn't going to maybe not require a full DAA solution. And the FAA may not actually prescribe that you have to have a DAA solution, but the safety case available to go beyond line of sight, like we talked about with American Aerospace, will help make it easier to get exemptions and later get certifications by using the technology. So we're continuing to evolve that ACX 3000 platform. That'll be the MX-12B V4 here. On the commercial side, it'll work for our eVTOL partners as a very low cost, low size, weight, and power, fully integrated ACAS solution for them to use as a pilot assistance or to go autonomously beyond line of sight. And then both that for, down to kind of the group 3-ish, call it the 50-pound or greater kind of aircraft, or even below with a single card solution that'll be more passive as a ACX 2000. Now that'll be geared more towards your smaller drones that if we see the notice of proposal, if we see the rulemaking for beyond line of sight, as we expect to see within the next year, right? What the BVLOS ARC recommended makes a lot of sense, and that is, hey, if an aircraft is transmitting its position even below 500 feet, the drone will stay clear. Well, in order to do that, it's got to be able to sense and avoid in a predictive way that thing. So we think one great way of doing that is ACAS SXU with passive sensors to receive UAT and ADSB signals from those potential general aviation aircraft or helicopters that are in that lower altitude airspace. So our ACX 3000 will be scaled down to the 2000 as a passive ACAS SXU platform. That's about enough for us we won't even get to all that, Dawn, but those are the things we're focused on.
Well, you're right. You've got a lot on your docket there. And Tom, I mentioned UTM, but all the things you're talking about, and that, this idea of fully integrated airspace, that eventuality, right? Even Part 108, like the FAA Drone and AAM Symposium in July, the panel that I moderated, the FAA said, outright, like UTM is going to be included in our Part 108 rule. Like, spoiler alert, it's going to be in there, right? We're not going to have a U space separate regulation like Europe. It's going to be part of beyond visual line of sight. And we had Manuel Quillo from Speedbird Aero on the show, and one of the guests in the chat said, it's this idea of eventually getting to drone kind of communications too, not just, conspicuity, not like see and be seen, but maybe even something beyond that. Again, I'm talking maybe Jetsons for drones at this point, but I see everything you're doing building up to that future.
Yep.
And so super exciting that
And
you're.
I will just jump in. Sorry to just jump in, but
Yeah,
one thing you
please.
mentioned, I don't want to pretend like, hey, our technology, drone to drone, which, by the way, that's the V2V or V2X in the future, which still is a ways away of the definition of that. But essentially, ADSB, UAT, and other similar technologies, those are aircraft to aircraft communication protocols, right? Maybe it's not voice protocols, but there's message structure going back and forth. That same thing in drones is a great safety layer, but it's not incompatible or different from UTM. It's an additional safety layer. So in a UTM world, everything that's in the UTM should be ideally visible to each other and can be deconflicted in the airspace, right? A couple of things could happen though. You could have a non-player come in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those aircrafts, something needs to sense that and feed that information, and that could be the UTM system sensing that and feeding that up. It could also be the other aircraft. If there are risks of failures, and we've all had cell phone signals cut out, etc.,
Sure.
if there's a loss of communication, even temporarily, having an onboard backup that can sense and avoid other aircraft to provide that safety case is important. And then we're also working on some projects that are taking ground-based information like through UTM, feeding it up to the onboard ACAS. So it can be also always providing its own safety solution. So you're not just relying on the ground-based mothership to keep you safe.
Right.
You also have this backup where if all else fails, you're just not going to crash into another aircraft because you have the logic on board to see and avoid it or detect and avoid it. So I think it fits all together as the safety stack for airspace.
I think that's a great tagline, Tom. You go tell Ashley the safety stack for safe airspace. Sagetech Avionics. So great stuff, Tom. I know you're super busy, but somehow your team finds time to go out to different shows and to meet with people in person. I know you and I talked at Exponential this year. With the limited time we have left, tell us where folks might be able to see you or your team in person, and also, of course, how they can reach you if they don't see you in person.
Yeah. So I'll start with the latter part and then go back, but reaching us is easy. Right? If you go to our website, sagetech.com, there's contact us pages on there. There's email addresses, so you can fill out forms. You can email me. My own email, I'm sure, is available. You can go on LinkedIn at Sagetech Avionics. You can look for me, Tom Furey. You can email me, call me, whatever. We do go to a lot of shows, and we tend to, right now, our industry is still working on the commercial side, but there's a lot of military need. If you look at the difference today, Don, in the global military perspective than it was when you and I started talking just a couple of years ago, it's wildly different, right?
Yes.
So there's a lot of collaboration. So we tend to, next week I'll be in Huntsville, Alabama at the AUVSI Pathfinder show down there. The following week, I think we have some folks coming in, so I'm not going to be at Commercial UAV or Drone Expo. We are typically up in North Dakota later in the year in October, November. I don't know if we're scheduled for that this year.
At the UAS Summit?
Yeah, I don't know if we're going this year or not, but we generally do.
I'll be up there. I'm excited. Yeah.
We go to all, obviously, the big AUVSI shows, and then anywhere the DoD is talking about drones or counter drones, we tend to show up.
Very, very cool. All right. Well, You know how to reach him. You know where to find him. Tom, before we close out, since we're at the end of the show, first of all, again, thank you for sponsoring this month of the Dawn of Autonomy. Thank you for everything you're doing to help keep our airspace safe for our soldiers, sailors, airmen, marines, and guardians out there, every day, and of course our coalition and partners, and then of course on the civil side. Anything you wanted to say in closing?
No, just by the way, thank you for what you do. And we only talked about it for a second here, but the systems part of what you'd said on the OEM software and systems, I think the systems aren't just like an ACX 3000, which is the system, I would say.
Yeah.
It's the collaboration with, for example, Matrix Space or Echodyne on the radar side, to Dalian, for example, on the vision system side, working with people like Invention or Micropilot on the autopilot side. These are systems that the aircraft need to be cohesive so that they can be safe. So as an industry, it's critical for us to collaborate, and I think you do a great job of bringing us all together.
Oh, well, thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. It's such a privilege, honestly, to be able to talk to folks like you and learn about what you're doing and to see how this industry is growing. Like I said, even like from that NASA AATI initial demo to like this exemption to today, I think it's a great arc, right? And we're just going to see more and more of this over the next couple years, and look forward to continuing to work with you. And for everybody else out there, thank you so much for joining us. We are out here.